when my sister was little, she used to imitate the Disney princesses she watched. She would throw herself on the bed like Sleeping Beauty and pretend to cry. And then she would look up every so often to see if her parents are watching, to see if she could get away with it and get what she wanted. And it never really worked. But because of that, I have been really fascinated with Disney princesses for a long time and the way that they cry. The princesses tend to like to cry in the same way, by covering their face with their arms, usually throwing themselves on a flat surface like the ground or a bed or a bench. And I thought this was very interesting because it covered their faces. You couldn't see their blotchy eyes, their scrunched up face, runny noses, because probably, I thought it was because it made them unbecoming, attractive as princesses. And Disney doesn't like to make their princesses seem unattractive. So in my fascination for crying princesses, I realized that a lot of the time, crying is actually what brings about the solution. Cinderella cries, the fairy godmother comes. Moana cries, her grandma comes, and Moana decides to actually go and save the day. And I thought it was interesting that these reactions from the princesses are so different. Cinderella is really acted upon. The other characters do everything for her, and Moana takes responsibility for herself. And I really thought this was super related to the time period in which they were produced. Cinderella was made in the 50s, and women really weren't very empowered back then. And now with Moana, women are gaining that empowerment. And so it's a really nice thing, but these movies also just reflect the time that they were made in. And I wanted to see if this was true of all Disney movies. If the princesses gained empowerment over time. I wanted to see if there was a progression. So I decided to record all the Disney princesses and how they cried, and if they took responsibility for their actions, or if they're or for their problems, or if their problems are solved by a different way. So the method I used to gather the data was qualitative. I recorded when the Disney princesses cried and what happened after. I thought it would really be a simple, oh, they took responsibility for themselves, they exercised their agency, yes. Or, no, they didn't take responsibility for themselves, someone else did, their problem was solved another way. No. It grew to be a little bit more complicated than that, and so I just wrote everything down and then remined the data later. And I came across a lot of conclusions that I wouldn't have if I'd stated that simple yes or no. And I came up with a lot of more interesting insights. The Disney princesses that I chose were all the cartoons, including their sequels, and all the animated princesses. Also, to look for alternative findings, I looked at Cinderella, the 2015 version with the real people, and I also looked at the Princess Diaries and the Princess Diaries 2 just to see if there was anything interesting there, because she's a princess too. I also looked at a few of the characters that were not the original princesses, and just to see if there was anything interesting with them. These are characters that could be considered princesses but aren't part of the Disney franchise, and we'll look at that in a minute. First, as part of the results, I would like to show how many times these Disney princesses cried in this lovely little chart here. So all of these characters cried at least once. There's actually a little pyramid going on as well. If you look at the original movies, not the sequels, not the new Cinderella or Princess Diaries, 5 princesses cried once, 4 cried twice, 3 cried thrice, and 2 cried 4 times. Really, Pocahontas only half cries. John Smith leaves and she's like, oh, I'm gonna save my people, or stay with my people. And she sheds a tear. I counted it as once. but it's only just a tear. I'd also note that two of the most relatable, possibly considered the most feminist, or at least the most actionable characters, are the characters that cry the most. Belle and Rapunzel. Ariel, Mulan, and Elsa follow closely behind. They also follow that most actionable characters, possibly the most feminist. The second thing I'd like to point out is in the sequels and live action, the sequels, all of these characters are the same characters as the originals. Ariel's daughter, Melody, is not in this group. She is in the next group. Two of these princesses don't cry in their sequels, and Ariel as well does not cry in her prequel, which is really interesting because she's younger in that. Then there's that Spike that I know you're looking at. That's Cinderella, the live action version. But this is also a movie that's supposed to be a bit more realistic. And Cinderella lives in a very abusive household and has a lot of sad things happen to her. And the only way she lets it out is crying. She usually doesn't get angry or talk back. And so that's how she lets out her emotions. So it makes sense that she cries a lot. Princess Mia doesn't change from movie to movie. All the other main characters that I chose to study only cried twice. Each one cried twice. So it's not very interesting, but the later data might be. So let's move on to looking at the autonomy that the princesses showed after their crying episodes. The first princess really interested me. Snow White, she's seen as this like really dainty character, but Snow White really shows a lot of autonomy. She really exercises her agency well in this film. She only cries once. And it's only after all these things are happening to her. She doesn't even cry when the guy's about to kill her, so that's pretty impressive. But when she cries, in the usual manner of crying, after she cries, she gets up and she sees this animal that's like looking at her, and she's scared for a moment and scares the animal away on accident. And then she goes and apologizes to the animal and explains that she's been going through a lot, and if they knew what she was going through, then they'd understand. And sorry for scaring you. I've been through a lot. And then she asks the animals for advice. She asks them what they do when they're scared. And that's like really impressive for a Disney princess to do, especially the first one. And she's 14, so she displays a lot of leadership ability by being able to take advice, but also later on by asking, after she's calmed down a little bit, asking the animals if they know a place where she can stay, and then going and cleaning this place and delegating chores to the animals. So she displays a lot of leadership and takes responsibility for herself 100%. It's really cool. The next princess, Cinderella, is not the case. She doesn't really help herself at all. Sleeping Beauty mostly just cries herself out all the time. Aurora doesn't really have anyone solve her problems, but she doesn't solve them either. She just needs to cry. So it doesn't really fall under either of the categories that I originally planned. Ariel is interesting because she does cry herself out once, and she does take responsibility for herself, and she actually looks for solutions, but she does sometimes seek help from other people. She needs help from the animals when she jumps into the water, not realizing that she can no longer swim. They help her through that, but she was the one who initiated it. Belle cries herself out the whole first day. She's just completely crying the whole time. Jasmine, Tiana, Rapunzel, Elsa, and Anna also just kind of cry themselves out, and then sometimes magic happens and solves their problem for them. Like the Beast and Merida's mom and Flynn Rider and Anna are magically like healed or turned back human, which is kind of crazy that many characters that happens to. It's kind of wild. And then Moana, of course, she goes and saves her island. Both times she cries. She doesn't even worry about herself, which is pretty cool. Here's the data that shows how many times someone else solved the problem, excluding just simple comforting. It's going, oh, it's okay, Here are the times that one or more autonomous decision or action was made by the princess after a crying episode. Now, this doesn't exclude them from getting help from other people, but the princess is usually the one to initiate action in these scenarios, and she doesn't just go with the flow. She really takes a lot of responsibility. So, as you can see, most of the time the princess actually exercises a lot of agency. Well done, Disney. Except for Cinderella, until she has her sequel and takes responsibility not only for herself, but her stepsister as well, which is really nice of her. But that doesn't show the most interesting data. The crying by these princesses made them really vulnerable. And that makes sense, because that makes everyone vulnerable when their emotions are that heightened. And they're more easily persuaded. Rapunzel goes to the pub, Ariel goes to the Sea Witch, and a lot of these decisions that the princesses make are actually pretty rash. I noticed that the vulnerable state leads them to rash decision making. Ariel going to the Sea Witch, she knows it's a bad idea, and yet she still goes. Mulan goes to war, that's a big deal. And so I noticed that a lot of this crying initiated this, and that wasn't the best response, but it was a very common thing for them to make rash decisions. And just to be clear, here are some of the rash decisions that these princesses made. Ariel goes to the Sea Witch, as I said before. Her daughter goes to the Sea Witch. Merida goes to a witch. They all like these witches. Mulan goes to battle. Moana goes off into the dangers of the ocean, chasing a stranger, which is kind of creepy. Cinderella, in her second movie, changes tradition completely. After her honeymoon, when she doesn't know anything about princess life, it's really not the best idea for her, but she does it anyway. The 2015 Cindy defies her stepmother. Multiple princesses decide not to get married, which kind of messes things up, or should mess things up, because it would threaten their kingdom or their crown, and it's really a messy situation to get in. So to boil it down, these princesses cry a lot, and sometimes they just cry themselves out, but when they do need a solution, usually they're the ones that take care of it. Sometimes with rash actions, but they're still the ones who take the initiative, which was the point of this study. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the influence that these princesses can have on society. So first of all, with social learning theory by Bandura, people imitate what they see. We can see a great example of this by my sister crying on the bed. People are really concerned, though, by girls following Disney princesses because they think that Disney princesses are poor role models, that a man's just going to save them and whatever. But really, that's not a problem as far, at least, as the crying is concerned. The women can fend for themselves. They can take care of themselves. The Disney princesses are fine. Don't worry about your children. As far as imitation is concerned, I'd only really be worried about the princesses that are making rash decisions and your children following them. Just a thought. So along with imitation, something that was really interesting, I was reading a lot of articles about the influence of Disney princess movies, and I saw that Disney princess movies positively affect young boys. They make them more pro-social, they don't shun girly things, they're more kind and sharing, and they develop more androgynous characteristics, just like the princes. The princes aren't very violent, and these boys are just generally a lot kinder. So it has a really good positive effect on these boys. And I'd bet that the responsibility that the princesses take for themselves would also have a same positive effect on these boys. Cultivation theory, which has many facets, is also something that is interesting in this. People are concerned with these Disney princesses and girls becoming like these Disney princesses and expecting a man to sweep them off their feet. But these Disney princesses don't have men that solve their problems, and so that's out the window. They don't have to worry about that. Resonance, another part of cultivation theory, shouldn't be a concern because these girls who are watching these movies aren't actually princesses, and they don't have lives that are very similar to the princesses, so their parents should not worry about that. Accessibility principle, if these are the only movies that these girls are watching, maybe that's a problem, and maybe it's a bigger problem if the parents don't talk and teach their kids. If they don't talk to their kids, then the girls aren't going to learn anything except for what they learned from Disney princess movies. Another big concern for people is gender stereotypes. But as far as men being violent and women being victims, this is not the case with women crying. With these Disney princesses, when they cry because of another person, half of them are because of what a man did to them, and half of them are because of what a woman or multiple women did to them. In the case of 2015 Cinderella, where she cries more than anyone else, the bully in that situation, or bullies, are her whole family, which is all women. And so that's something that's really interesting because women are not really seen as the victims so much in this, and men aren't seen as so much the perpetrators. It's pretty even, it's pretty neutral. People don't have to worry about gender stereotypes as far as crying is concerned. I did this study because I was interested in Disney princesses and how they cry, and really wanted to see if they'd made progression over the years and how they take responsibility for their problems. I did this by watching a multitude of Disney princess movies and recording how they cried and how others and they themselves reacted after the crying. I found that there's no real correlation between the years the movie came out and the autonomy displayed after a crying episode. Belle displays just as much autonomy when she tells the Beast to leave her alone as Rapunzel does when she tells Flynn Rider that he needs to take her to the floating lights. Ariel and her daughter follow the same pattern in going to the Sea Witch, and really Merida does too. There's definitely more activism in the newer movies, and especially in the sequels to the original ones. It's kind of like an annoying amount of activism. But the legacy of leadership is something that started with Snow White and continues on. So excluding Cinderella, in her first movie at least, all the girls either cry themselves out or exercise autonomy, which is really important. When someone else saves the day, a lot of the times it's just magic. It's not anyone coming to the rescue. It's just magic that magically fixes things. So because of this, nobody needs to worry about gender stereotypes portrayed. They're not super involved. People don't have to worry about their little girls being acting defenseless just because they watch Disney princess movies. It's not a big deal. Calm down. This is the end of this video. Thanks for watching.